Today's the day we talk about Jesus. It's crazy it took us so long to find Jesus, and I always thought it'd be a myth, but now Jesus has come to me in the mail on Wednesday. Of course, I'm talking about the Jesus switch. You might be wondering, Huey, what's the Jesus switch? Jesus switch is a switch that wouldn't be possible without the Panda switch, and I'd like to tell you a tale of the Panda before we get to the Jesus, and oh boy, it's quite the tale. But before I tell you that tale, I'd like to tell you about the sponsor for this video, Kono.store, where you can check out the Gemini Dusk and Dawn, which are hot swappable InTwitch RGB TKL keyboards that include PPT keycaps and are fully programmable. Check them out in the link in the description below. And the intro goes here, and the intro goes here, and the intro goes here, and the intro ends here. Wednesday, October 26, 2016, was the day that Inver announced the beginning of the group buy for the Inver Panda superlinear switches. These switches were a collaboration between Mech27 and Inver and were created with a singular goal: to create the smoothest possible factory linear switch. They plan to accomplish this with POM switches, 67-gram springs, additional lubrication, and new custom molds for the switch tops and bottoms. These switches were originally sold at $1 each or $69.99 for 110 switches. There's only one run of these switches, meaning a limited amount in the entire world. So let's start it off right away. Did the Inver Panda linear switch achieve its goal of being the smoothest possible factory linear switch? No. These switches were not factory lubed consistently like originally marketed, and these switches did not meet the claim to be the smoothest possible factory linear. In fact, these switches failed to continually sell for quite a while, their prices dropping down due to the general dissatisfaction of the switch as a linear switch. People had pretty high expectations for a 50 to 60 cent switch, but they were let down because you could find a smoother Gatoron linear switch for 20 to 30 cents each. This doesn't mean the Panda switch got everything wrong though. In fact, the things it got right really thrust it into the spotlight. What the Panda switch got right was what mattered. It had tight tolerances and no wobble for the stem, and this was appreciated by many in the community who were not a fan of keycap wobble while typing. Next up was the sound. It just had this right sound, tone, and timbre that a lot of people, including myself, really liked. In fact, some people just took the Panda tops off to throw on different bottom housings to take advantage of the better acoustics and lowered wobble. Already for many switch modders, the Panda switches had value, and this value I described was just the cherry on top, because the whole Sunday that got the Panda switch thrust into the spotlight was that leaf and bottom housing, because of its amazing tolerances. While it didn't turn out to be the best linear switch, the Panda housing could elevate any tactile stem to be better than it ever was. Xandas were made, which were Zelio stems in Pandas, were among some of the first popular mods done. This is during the 2016 era of Zelios, when they weren't as wobble-free as they are today. Many people made clear-minded Pandas, which are MX clear stems and Pandas, and those became very popular. Both of these became very popular tactile switches in the enthusiast community despite their relatively high prices at the time. The ball really started rolling when Quakums of Topclack made the first Holy Panda. This was done with the Halo stems that he and I received at the Seattle meetup from Hata of Input Club. After Quakums made the switch, he immediately told me I had to do the same thing to, one, prove that these were awesome, and two, ensure he wasn't crazy. So I did it on stream the very next day, and from there these were christened the Holy Pandas, and it took off because it is one of the best MX tactile switches around. So suddenly, these difficult to sell Panda switches were flying off the shelves. Originally being sold at 50 cents, originally rose to sell for over $4 a switch. That left many people unsatiated and wanting, whether it be a replacement, alternative, or a clone. People wanted more Panda switches. And of course, the issue was people would never see more original Pandas. The Panda switches were only made for one run, and afterwards, Inver has said that the original molds that he and 27 used no longer existed. These molds were either destroyed or in too bad shape to continue using, so they were completely recycled. So, wouldn't it be striking for the community to see this intercheck on Monday, October 8th? Keycat user Supervan started an intercheck for new original Panda linear switches. This was met by both positive and negative feedback. Many were happy that a Panda switch would be created and that would be much more affordable than the current market rate of $2 to $4 per switch. But at the same time, many were skeptical that such a switch could be created based on what Inverse said about the molds. That's because these switches were advertised to be the same switch made to the same spec, but with a different logo. Recently, these switches have been renamed to be the Gsus switch. If you want to know the reason, you can read through the Geekhack thread, link in the description. I'm here to get to the bottom of this. I'm here to bottom out a conclusion. Are these in fact the same switch? Are they similar or the same to the original Panda switch? Will they interact with tactile switches in the same way? I can't go to China to check on the tooling, nor do I have access to the original switch CAD files. But what I do have are the new Gsus switches, Panda switches, Holy Panda switches, and halos to make Holy Gsus switches. I also have a nice nifty machine that will allow me to get force curve graphs for direct comparison. Take a look at the Gsus switches for a visual inspection by eye, both by my normal eye and my microscope. Starting off by eyes, these are visually a bit different than the original Panda switches. The color on the bottom housing seems to be a bit cooler on the Gsus switches, and the Gsus switch overall seems to be a bit more glossy compared to the matte finish of the Inverse Panda. The Gsus switches, at least the ones I have, don't ship with the hot swap sockets that the Pandas did, but that's okay since I always had trouble using the hot swap sockets on the Pandas with other switches. So, what's next? The next part is the switch top removal aspect. The Gsus switches don't work with switch top removal up top, just like with the Pandas, but they do fit fine on the bottom. Well, let's see if there are any housing or slider differences. First off, let's bust out the microscope, and under the microscope we can see interesting changes between both. First, let's start off with this linear stem. The linear stems on both switches are different. It's easy to see this. Look on the sliders, look on the rails where they make contact. These are different linear sliders. At least the molds are different. They may produce the same result, but they are produced differently. The Gsus stems don't have the notch in the cruciform, and the bottom of the Gsus has sprue marks that are absent in the Panda switch. Both of them have the same cruciform measurements though, 1.3mm x-axis thickness and 1.06mm y-axis thickness. The lengths for both x and y cruciform are the same, 3.97mm by 3.97mm. The Panda switch has different sprue markings on the SMD cutout compared to the Gsus switch, so very interesting differences between both. For the bottom housing though, it seems like they have the same sprues on the inside around the bottom pole. Between both springs, I honestly couldn't really tell you a difference unless I started counting, but it's best to just refer to the force curve graph when we get there. So after this quick little visual inspection, I can at least draw some preliminary conclusions. I'm pretty sure that these are not the same exact switches. They are very, very similar. Extremely similar, but I don't think that the Panda switches were the same and had just better job removing or masking the sprues. I don't think that'd be the case. I think that there are actual differences in the molding, but will those differences make a difference in the force curves? Let's find out. So for my test, what I did first was run a 4mm calibration test to determine where the switch actually begins to bottom out. And this is so I can change the testing parameters to yield a graph that is legible and not completely flat looking due to poor scaling. Afterwards, I ran the test 5 times on the switch in a row in order to grab more data for the force curve. Then I overlay the relevant tests on top of each other. Nice and simple. So for the first graph, we'll take a look at the comparison between the Gsus and the Panda switch. In black, we have the Gsus switch ran 5 times in a row, and in brown, we have the Panda switch ran 5 times in a row. The downstroke is amazingly similar, but the upstroke for each switch is surprisingly different. And I don't know if this has anything to do with the leaf or the spring. My guess would have to be with the leaf. I don't know yet for sure, and I think some more investigation is worth putting into for finding out this difference. The bottom out difference is the same, but the downstroke from what it looks like is practically identical. I don't think anyone or too many people will feel that change or difference in force in a blind test between both switches, and this is quite interesting. Next up, we want to find out if the Gsus switch interacts with tactile switches in the same way as the inverse Pandas. And to do this, the best comparison I have would be to compare a wholly Gsus switch and a wholly Panda switch. So for both, I'll be using their respective stock springs and stock housings and be using a tactile halo stem in lieu of the linear stem. And when I look at both overlaid, wow, just wow, look at the bump on the downstroke. Almost spot on, as well as the rest of the downstroke, with the upstroke being different as expected based off the upstroke difference we saw in the previous graph. Most likely, once again, having to do with the leaf. Needs more investigation to be conclusively sure that's the answer. So based on these graphs and my physical analysis, let's go with my general opinion about this. I believe that technically these are different switches, and the evidence I bring is the difference in the molding and the difference in the upstroke. But practically, I think these are practically the same switch. Aside from the upstroke, if you're not a person who raises their fingers with the keycap as it goes up and you just tap and move off, you're not going to really tell the difference. So that's what I think initially. I think more testing is going to be done. I've only had these for less than 48 hours of the time that this video is going up. So just the other day, in addition to announcing that these switches would be called the Gsus switch, Supervan also announced that the possible price of the switch would be between $1 and $1.50 depending on how much sold. And that's between 2 and 2.5 times the original vendor price and about under half the amount of the market price. And this puts it pretty high in terms of pricing. It takes 50,000 switches sold to reach $1 per switch, and if the minimum MOQ is met at 10,000, we're paying $1.50, and right in the middle at 20,000, the price is $1.20. And for me, that highest price at $1.50, that seems very, very difficult to swallow when Zio's most expensive linear isn't that much. It's way more smoother, and it's about like almost the same price basically. So as a switch modder, these switches do open up a lot of possibilities with seeing different housings, different stems, different springs, and different lubes, but these possibilities seem a bit locked behind the price. Whether people will pay up to $1.50 or $1 is up in the air. It's cheaper than market price, sure, but it's more expensive than basically any production switch out there. Would I pay $1.50 per switch for these personally? I think I would for only one batch. And just because I like collecting switches and having a repertoire of switches, but that's not the same for everyone else. Would I continually rebuy switches at that price? No, I would not. Would I buy Gsus switches for $1 each? More than likely I would. These line up with the highest cost of switches produced and retailed in the market, but for many it's still a lot. I guess it comes down to why you're buying these switches. Are you buying them purely as a nice sounding linear that you want to lube up and use as is? Are you buying them to create holy pandas or other switch modifications? I think that what it comes down to is the final cost of the switch you're going to make and how it fits with your budget and your build. So here's my final conclusion as of today. Gsus switches are technically different from Panda switches, but practically the same in usage. So you tell me, why are you interested or disinterested in these switches now? Will you buy them? Will you ignore them? How do you feel about the price? How do you feel about the switch? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm really excited to hear all of your thoughts on this switch. If you guys want me to make more videos about these switches, like putting some Zio V2 stems in or finding the reason the upstroke is different or anything else, I'm open to suggestions. If you want to see me just build these up stock, lubed, or modded with the tactile stem, let me know as well. That could be a pretty fun build video in the future. So if you like this video, feel free to like, subscribe, share. Feel free to check out my other videos. Comment down below with any suggestions you have for me to improve. I read through every single comment, and I'm always thankful for all the feedback you do. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to join my Discord. And if you want to support what I do, check out my Patreon, link in the description. I hope you guys really much enjoyed this video. See you guys Monday for This Week in Keyboards.